Joining us live now is Peter Mathews, Professor of Political Science at Cyprus College. Thank you for your time. Now, we just heard there about how Donald Trump narrowly lost Nevada to Hillary Clinton at the last election. There are a lot of really key seats here up for grabs that are really being impacted quite heavily by COVID-19. Do you think that's going to impact the outcome?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, if you look at the states, there's been surges in over 40 states in terms of new infections. The United States as a whole has over 3,600,000 people infected, with 71,000 new infections just one day, a couple of days ago, which was the largest ever before. Other states like Michigan are heavily impacted. Florida, which is the biggest impact of coronavirus, and it's really the voters there, might go with Biden. It's a very close contest in Florida, and in other swing states that are affected by coronavirus and the economy, Mr. Biden is leading by double digits. Michigan, for example. So yes, it could have big impact.
And it's always hard to pick which way Florida's going to go. When we're looking at the US right now, though, it is really being dominated by its issues with China. There's been an executive order on national security laws. What more can you tell us?
Yes, it has to do with Hong Kong's status. And, recently China cracked down on Hong Kong's independent type of lifestyle and politics, decentralized it, and decided to bring Hong Kong in tightly into the Union because there were so many protests and the Hong Kong people didn't want to be extradited to the mainland China to be able to stand trial for any kind of accusation. There were a lot of human rights issues that were brought up in these protests, and China decided to crack down completely and bring in Hong Kong as an integral part of China, as it would much earlier than what it had planned to do. I think it had a lot to do with the tensions with the United States as well and what was going on, and what China felt would be threatening to their own sovereignty. But it certainly puts a big damper on freedom of expression and of the democracy that Hong Kong did have for a while.
And this is really playing out in a significant way that's going to impact Australia, in that it's making things much more tense around the South China Sea and China's claims to land and water there.
It certainly is. And all of this is building up together. For example, President Trump just put through an executive order that would sanction Hong Kong businesses and Hong Kong leaders who are helping China to crack down. And so it's going to hurt the Hong Kong people's economy itself. And in terms of security and what you mentioned, Australia and neighboring countries like the Philippines, for example, they're very concerned about the South China Sea, when China has become even more assertive now and said that 80% of the South China Sea is under Chinese territory, sovereignty. And so that's a problem, and it goes back to the Law of the Sea Convention of the United Nations, where a 12-mile territorial sea limit was established, but a 200-mile economic zone was allowed for each country, and China sees it differently. The United States sees that it should be able to send in, ships through those lanes, even in the economic zone. They should be able to have military maneuvers with naval vessels. And China says, no, you can't do that. This is part of our exclusive economic zone. And so there's a big dispute in how they interpret the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention, the two sides, and it's becoming much more tense right now. And we hope we can negotiate this and not end up in some type of a military situation. There could be conflict.
How much do you think this issue on China relations with the United States is going to impact voter sentiment at the next election?
I think it's going to certainly have an impact with some of the Trump supporters, because he's seen as standing strong against China, and many of them have been led to blame China as far as the United States economic situation goes, even though the president, I think, was at least partly responsible for bringing about the trade war with China, with all these tariffs that he put on, and China retaliated. But his base really likes to see that anti-China policy or posture of the president's. But there are other people in the United States who say, look, let's not let this get out of hand. There's got to be a way to negotiate this. There will be no winners in the end with a trade war or a shooting war. And so we should be much more measured and diplomatic, and then work things out as much as we can, and recognize that certain countries have a certain amount of interest in those neighborhoods. And yet it's a very tight balancing act, because you do have to make sure that other countries that have their own say and their own independence in those areas remain independent. So I think it'll have an impact in the election with a certain segment of the voters, and depends where those voters live. I think if they live in the Midwestern states, which could be swing states, they might actually bring about a few more votes for President Trump and allow him to win the election. At this point, he's got a big hole to climb out of. He's way behind nationwide as well as many of the swing states. So he's trying his best to get his people fired up, and this is part of it, I would think.
All eyes will be on those swing states, but one really interesting state where the polling seems a bit uncertain right now is Texas, which you wouldn't expect might swing Democrat, but certainly looks like it might be up for grabs at the moment.
Very interesting. I lived in Texas. I went to university in Texas in the last part of my high school, so 8 years in the Dallas area, so I know the people there. And it's quite remarkable that after these many decades of being solidly Republican, that Mr. Biden was actually within 1 point of catching Trump in the popular vote in Texas. He might actually be ahead in the margin of error. So this is very remarkable. It's a big sea change from the last time when President Trump won it by a good margin. And Texas is a huge state. I think it's the second largest electoral votes that comes out of Texas, the second largest state in the union population-wise after California. So if Mr. Biden was able to take Texas, he wouldn't have to even worry about those other smaller or Midwestern swing states that are smaller in number in terms of population. It's quite remarkable to see what's happening right now. We have to keep tracking that carefully.
Would be a complete game changer. And just finally, Biden's still on the hunt for a vice president. Do you think he's any closer to picking a candidate?
That's a very good question. He said he would announce it in August. That's only less than a month away now, and we have to see if the convention comes up toward the end of August. He's got a little bit of time to do it. But he's definitely going to pick a woman, as he promised, and I'm not sure if it'll be a woman of color or someone else. And either way, he's got good candidates to choose from. And the main thing that's going for Biden is there's a huge anti-Trump sentiment in terms of how the president has actually handled the coronavirus crisis, or mishandled it at the beginning, and also how he's handled race relations after the terrible situation with the killing of the African-American gentleman in Minnesota. It was really horrible, and that sparked this whole protest all the way across the country, and that's influenced the way people think and vote. Far more many suburban white voters are now switching over to Mr. Biden, thinking that President Trump did not handle the death and the subsequent protests that occurred. So that's a big, major problem for President Trump at this point.
Yeah, would be surprised if we don't see an African-American vice presidential candidate for Biden, but who knows what's going to happen by August or even November. Peter Mathews, Professor of Political Science at Cypress College. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Take care.